Welcome back to Feminist Frequency Radio, because we know you've been around this whole time and you're not checking this episode out because of this particular topic. This is the show that asks you to be critical of the media you love. I'm Anita Sarkeesian, and I'm joined today by a woman whose safe combination is the same as her Wi-Fi password, Carolyn Pettit.
Whose Wi-Fi password is all numbers? Why is it the Wi-Fi password all numbers? That was where this whole game just completely fell apart for me, Naughty Dog. That's where you lost me right there, was with that puzzle.
Yep, how dare they? This week, if you haven't already guessed or didn't already see in your feeds, the two of us are going to have a very spoiler-filled conversation about Naughty Dog's latest controversial and divisive new blockbuster game, The Last of Us Part 2.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, Carolyn, we're doing this.
Yeah.
We both, I think, finished the game very quickly, quote unquote. Like we kind of
we plowed through it. You know,
Yeah.
I was motivated by the fact that I knew I wanted to write something about it, and you want to get your piece out there while the conversation is still like in its kind of early stages. So I did make every effort to kind of get through the game. I mean, as quickly as possible while still taking my time with it to explore the environments, to not play it differently than I would have played it otherwise. But yes.
Yeah, totally. And like it was getting increasingly difficult to avoid spoilers or other people's thoughts on it and all of that. So I think we wanted to just get through it. And I say that too because we were actually going to record this earlier, and we've both had like time to let the game sort of simmer and rest. And I think that my reactions to the game has changed a little, like not significantly, but like, there's a little bit of space. And so I'm just, letting folks know that we're coming into this, like having played the game pretty quickly and then like letting it just sort of sit for a little bit. Which is very different than like review culture, right? Where you play the game and have to have immediate responses to it.
Absolutely. And I think a game like this really benefits from having a little time to mull it over and to think about it, that you might, for better or worse, you're just the fact that having that bit of perspective that time affords, maybe clarifies things you really didn't like about it, maybe lets you appreciate things about it that you didn't at first appreciate, whatever the case may be. But yeah, gosh, I can tell you from my time in the trenches of professional game reviews, it's that pressure to, you got to hit embargo, you got to plow through the game as fast as possible and write the review as fast as possible. Not always conducive to the most kind of thoughtful criticism out there. So it is kind of a luxury in a way to be able to think about a game for a bit before you, really talk, share your thoughts on it.
Yeah, totally. Well, so let me do a little intro to the game for us, and then we have so much I think that we want to talk about that. I want us to just like
let's
dive
get into
in.
It.
So The Last of Us Part 2 continues the saga of Joel and Ellie, which first began back in 2013. I can't believe it's been that long between games. So the first game is considered by many to be a high watermark for third-person action-adventure games, but for a massive AAA production that costs tremendous amounts of money to produce, the sequel is proving to be surprisingly divisive. It makes narrative decisions that are alienating to many quote-unquote core gamers, while the relentlessly violent world it offers and its focus on characters hell-bent on revenge is leaving many critics kind of cold. So today, Carolyn and I are going to talk about our thoughts on this unusual blockbuster. But just one big, huge, massive warning before we get started. We're going to discuss the whole game. Nothing is off the table. So if you haven't played it yet and don't want to have it spoiled for you, please go away and then come back next week when we talk about other stuff. But we want, there's no way to talk about this game without talking about the whole game.
Right. Not to have a serious, the serious kind of conversation that we want to have about it. But interestingly, this game, was kind of spoiled for you many years ago because you worked on it, right? I mean, you were very, very central, actually, to the development of this game.
Someone's going to pull that. Someone's going to clip that and put that on the internet.
Yeah. Fair.
No, it's fine. I don't know. If for those of you who are immensely online or follow the rumors around this game, there are rumors that I worked on the game. I did not. Had nothing to do with this game. And so it's, maybe if we have time, or maybe in the bonus, we can talk about the reactions to the game. And like, it's been a lot. Like, there's been a lot of abuse and online harassment towards anyone that they don't like, including like people who voice act the characters, like the creators of the game. And it's been really disappointing. But yeah, like maybe I don't know if I want to take up time right now to talk about that. But I don't want to. Yes, I don't want us to like.
I don't want us to talk about the game through the lens of like its worst fans, right? Like I think that would be a disservice. But I do think that there are things that are revealing about some of those reactions that it may be relevant to at least bring up at times.
Sure. Absolutely.
Yeah. Go ahead.
I've been a little intimidated to have this conversation, Carol.
Sure.
Like, it's just, I feel like there's a lot happening in this game, and really, the spirit of feminist frequency, the spirit of like, be critical of the media you love, like understand that we can hold multiple things at once, is, I think, extremely relevant to this game in particular. For me, at least, like there are things I aggressively fucking hate about this game, and there are things that I really, really adore. Yes. And it makes it a little bit complicated to come at this with a like I can't just be like, yeah, I like The Last of Us too, and I can't be like, yeah, I hate it, because it's just, there's so much happening here.
Right. And I mean, maybe it's sort of helpful to talk about sort of some of those pieces. Maybe the things that, I mean, that certainly that appeal to me. For instance, I mean, it is I've been playing games for my entire life. And okay, I want to say first, like, some folks are saying, understandably so, I think, that when a game like The Last of Us Part 2 gets it's a lot of praise for, say, centering queer women, and there's a prominent trans character in it and things like that. So there are folks out there who will say things like, by celebrating this game for doing that so much, you're erasing the fact that queer people, trans people, women, et cetera, have been making games that center characters like this for ever, or for a long time. And like, I absolutely want to be very clear. Like, Butterfly Soup is like one of my favorite games of this past decade. There are numerous games that I absolutely love that center queer people, trans people, that are bi, queer, and trans people. And so but I do think that it's still important. There is a way in which, when a game of this scope that is aimed at a mainstream, at the like widest possible audience, centers characters like the ones that are centered in this game, it is important in a different way, unfortunately, maybe, than a game that is like going to be, and not that smaller, vital, art isn't every bit as essential and vital. I mean, to me, it's, what I want the future of games to look like is way more, Butterfly Soup and like those kinds of indie games, quirky games, etc. Like, than, say, The Last of Us Part 2. Like, that's where my passion lies. That's where I think the most interesting work is happening. But we have to acknowledge that, like, there is a kind of a different kind of cultural impact, potentially, when a game like this does it.
I mean, this is the highest, fastest selling Sony release ever. In the history of all of the Sony games that have ever come out. So like, that means something to have, like, there is a trans character, there are multiple queer characters, there's loads of women. It is a game that is not shy when it comes to being able to just show that there are lots of different people in the world and that they are just as valid to be in a video game as anybody else.
This is not like Star Wars with the 2-second lesbian kiss, or the Avengers movie where you would have like a 20-second scene where like a gay character who you never see again mentions like dating another man or whatever. Like, this is a game that legitimately humanizes and centers and asks us as the players to identify with these characters.
And notably, it's a world that acknowledges the tension of homophobia and transphobia, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's not a world that's just like, hey, we're just going to slot in a queer character for what was written originally as a straight character. It's like, no, the world acknowledges and recognizes that there are, just as our current world, even though this is set in the future, like there's still a lot of bigotry and hatred towards folks. And then there's also really beautiful moments of acceptance and normalization of queer identities as well. And so I think that there's a lot happening in the game in terms of what am I saying? In terms of like making it normal, like making queerness normal.
Yeah. Right. So
let's dive into some of those. Like who comes to mind as someone you want to talk about first? I'm curious your thoughts on Lev. Do you want to start there? So
Lev
absolutely. is a trans character in the game. And so I'm curious what you thought about that representation.
So, and again, with a sort of disclaimer, like, to be very clear, of course, there is no monolithic trans identity. There is no monolithic, like, trans response to a character like this. And, my response is my response. It doesn't mean that other folks who have different responses to Lev, that their responses aren't, or their criticisms aren't valid. But, I really like Lev a lot. I mean, as a character, he's sort of where the hope of this whole game resides, in a sense. Like, I think of Abby and Lev as a kind of interesting and ultimately hopeful mirror of Joel and Ellie, right? Because if you're from the first game, Joel takes Ellie under his wing. In this game, you have Abby, who takes Lev under her wing. And Ellie is a character who is tremendously traumatized, carries around a tremendous amount of shame because she could have been the cure for the plague, and Joel kind of, in her mind, denied her that. Lev, by contrast, although he's been through an awful lot and seen a lot of suffering, seems, I think, to have a kind of hope about the future, openness to the future that Ellie doesn't, and I find that really kind of endearing. And so, as far as like how Lev's trans identity specifically is dealt with, I suspected Lev was trans when I met him, although it's not, Abby doesn't make an issue out of it right away, and I appreciated that she doesn't. Like, because in my mind, Abby, it's not an issue to Abby. Like, that was why she didn't react. And so then you encounter these characters, the faction that Lev is sort of escaping from because he couldn't be himself in that faction, and they dead name him. To me, there have been criticisms that say that the way this game handles it makes it into like a plot twist or like a reveal. That wasn't my experience as a player, because I sort of picked up on clues, the way Lev's sister Yara talks about, oh, he shaved his head. Like, okay, why is that a big deal? Oh, I think I have an idea why it's a big deal. Like, to me, those characters were only revealing that they are intolerant assholes, right? When they dead name Lev. So anyway, ultimately, like, yeah, I have this kind of hope for Lev. I want if there is a future for this franchise, I maybe want to see Lev in that future, but I would hope that future is one less defined by vengeance and suffering than this game is, and one that's maybe more rooted in hope and the possibility of a new kind of future that the survivors, maybe on Catalina, can create together.
Yeah, and I really liked Lev. I liked that relationship, like you said, like the relationship between Abby and Lev as that continued was really lovely. And I think I don't know, like, and whatever my opinion is on this, like, I don't feel like it was a gotcha. I feel like it was character development in some ways, right? Like, it wasn't like the very first thing that's going to come up when you meet these people is that, like, we've run away because our tribe, our people, our families don't approve of transness, right? And so I think that it was actually really tasteful in a lot of ways about how that was revealed, and to have Abby not care and be like, you do you, man. I'm here for you. Like,
and the way, so when you see them in Santa Barbara together, there's just this way in which Lev seems to sort of be, starting to come into his own as the person that he is, like maybe starting to explore his own identity. He seems sort of more confident, more comfortable in his own skin. And, you get the sense that Abby has been a good kind of guardian, parent figure in a way to him in that way. And part of the game where you play as Abby, to me, is really interesting because I think it's doing a couple of things with in this game. I mean, there's a sense in which I feel like it's trying to say, oh, hey, if you were all gung-ho on Ellie's like revenge mission to come kill Abby, well, guess what? Abby's like a human being too, and has friends and a life of her own and all of these things.
In case you haven't played the game and you're listening to this just out of curiosity, like half the game you play as Ellie and then the other half you play as Abby. I mean, that's a little reductive, but that's kind of what happens.
Right. Yeah, it shifts to Abby and you sort of replay those days that you've played as Ellie from Abby's perspective. And those days are very transformative in Abby's life, right? Because what happens is she lives in this Seattle world where people's identities are entirely subsumed by the faction that they belong to, right? She's a wolf, and that's hardcore, like who she is. It's her whole life is being a wolf. And then there are the Seraphites, or the Scars, as they're sort of derogatorily referred to by the WLF. And, these factions they don't see each other as people. They're just at war, etc. And so, there's this kind of meta thing happening where Abby learns to reconsider her whole notion of just about everything, certainly seeing the Scars through just a purely dehumanizing lens. But I guess what's so interesting to me about what happens in that part of the game is that, and here I am going to bring up those players that are reacting with so much hostility to this game. There are those players who are like, Joel and Ellie are like my people. Abby kills Joel. I want revenge for Joel's murder, and then fuck you for making me play as Abby for so much of this game. I hate her. She killed Joel, etc. And it's it's this weird thing where the game's sort of message with regard to that kind of factional identity of these are my people and those are the people I'm against, and that's how I want it to be. I just want to get my revenge, and that's how I want it to be. The whole game is trying to say don't have. It's weird because it's a game that's. I mean, you spend so much time enacting violence, and it's so much about vengeance. But I do think there is a way in which this game is trying to say the choices these characters are making are bad, and you should not have this vengeful attitude, or you shouldn't dehumanize other people. And yet, even though it's this really kind of basic message, there's a way in which so many of the players of this game are just demonstrating the degree to which they don't want to even engage with that message on its most basic terms. They just want a game that's going to be very simplistic about these things, and who feel really upset that the game would even ask them to identify with other characters, even though the game is all about, in a sense, identifying with people that you might want to write off as not worth identifying with.
Which is the whole point, yeah. Abby is such an interesting character to me in so many ways. One, Abby's physique, I think, is really, really notable. Abby is ripped, just like super muscular, super ripped. She is not like a stereotypical like female character in games. You know, like she's super bulky, and you see that evolution. Like you see that she trained to get that way. She also has like small breasts, you know, like and she's still considered like desirable. Right. She still has sexual relationships or one that we know of with a man. And I think that is really, really important and was really refreshing in a lot of ways to see that. Yeah.
Like I find Abby attractive, right? I find, and it's like, it's interesting that for so long, like there have been entire types of like, part of what we've lost by having just basically the one female body type in games that has been like just super dominant, is like other types of female beauty too. Like I find Abby very attractive, and I'm like, yes, games like I want to see other types of women that I find appealing and interesting and attractive as and I think she's very interesting as a person. I mean, the fact that she's very sadistic and vengeful in our first encounter with her, that's a pretty big hurdle to get over. And if she were a real flesh and blood person, I probably would not ever be able to just be like, "That's cool that you did that." Like, but 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 I do think there's a way in which a narrative like this, you know, if we don't take it entirely literally and we sort of look at it more as like a psychological and emotional exploration of characters growing and learning and struggling, then it works for me.
Yeah, well, so I want to talk about that because what you have is you play as Ellie, becoming increasingly sadistic, right? Increasingly homicidal, just like becoming unhinged. And you play as Abby in reverse. So Abby starts as like, you know, just singularly focused on revenge. And as you continue to play as Abby and you see her questioning the wolves, you see like her allegiance to this sort of, you know, larger family that she's been a part of. You see her, you know, care for others and worry and concern for others. Her realizing that revenge didn't really like do much to make her any less sad. I feel like it's very in my mind. I'm just kind of like, oh, fuck Ellie. Like I'm almost frustrated that the game makes us hate her so much, and it makes us love Abby so much. And what I like is that Abby does get to have growth. She does get to learn and grow and evolve in a way where Ellie doesn't. Ellie devolves, and just like the whole game is her devolving, and we don't see redemption in Ellie. Like, and I think that might be debatable for some folks, but to me, like, with the distance I have from the game, I'm just like, ugh. Like, I just think so poorly of all of the choices that Ellie went through. And, you know, like, that's okay. But I think that leads into this larger theme that I think we have to talk about, Caro, is like, what is the game saying about violence? Right? What is the larger themes of revenge and in-groups and out-groups? And to me, I will die on the hill of, I do not think that video games can critique violence by making you do violence. Like, Hotline Miami tried to do it.
Yes.
Spec Ops: The Line tried to do it. And now this game is trying to do it, and you can't. And and just because it's making, like, the game makes you feel things, like, without a doubt. And I think we can, you know, get into like how incredible the acting and the dialogue and the emotional range is. But like, ultimately, you are making the player complicit and making us do things that we don't want to be doing. And that isn't deep. Like, I'm sorry, that's just not deep.
Right. I mean, so, yeah, there's an interesting tension for me in the game where I think that it gets moments between people so right. I mean, so I'll be watching a scene from this game, and I think the voice acting is so good, and the writing is so good. It can sort of like, I think the scenes that we do get between Joel and Ellie, where there's like that kind of awkward, fumbling tension between them, and like they don't really know how to process or move past what Joel did, but you can tell that that Ellie on some level wants to, and and that he wants to. Like, I think that there's this naturalism to it that I find very engaging. It's understated, it's believable in a lot of ways, and so there's a tension for me between like how right it gets moments between people and how wrong it gets like people collectively, or people like the human race collectively.
Absolutely.
Where and that to me does feel like it is a product of the limitations of what is considered possible in the AAA game space, right? Like, I'm absolutely not saying that people aren't capable of savage violence. We all know that we are. I'm not saying that at all. But what this game is, there's like a piece missing in this game, I think, and that is the piece of that would focus on, or more fully illuminate the ways that people, come together in times of hardship, are collective. And like, of course we see the town, that they live in at the beginning, but that's all just like sort of background window dressing. It's not like the thematic focus. There's no narrative, like, energy devoted to exploring people coming together, and yeah. So I especially after The Last of Us Left Behind, which is the wonderful DLC for the first Last of Us, which was very kind of, in some ways you could say experimental, or tried to like push the limits in other ways of what these kinds of mechanics can do in terms of demonstrating like play between people and relationship building and stuff like that. There just feels like a piece missing in this game in terms of its portrayal of humanity collectively.
Yeah, one thing that I found really frustrating about the first game that is continued, and I think even amplified in the second, is that this is a game that takes place during a global pandemic where like the population has been massively decreased. And the idea that you would murder other humans in this moment feels extremely tone deaf to me. Like why would you murder other people? And the long-standing trope in media in general about like folks not coming together, like people being like, you should be more afraid of other people than you should of the zombies that are coming to get you. Like I don't like those stories. And so in this game, I think it amplifies and ratchets that up. So not only are you like killing random people, but there are these warring factions that are very tribalistic in the sense of like, if you're not with us, you die, right? Like we are going to murder you because you have different beliefs than us, because we're fighting for limited resources, because, what have you, and creating a very like very reminiscent of like patriotic ideals, right? You're with us or you're against us. And in this, and I know that this game has been in the making for 7 years,
right?
But like in this very moment in time, it feels really gross to perpetuate that myth.
Yeah, you find so many letters in this game, sort of just artifacts from people who were alive before, or from the early stages of the sort of the collapse of society, and with like one or two exceptions where you occasionally might find a letter about someone like doing something sort of kind for another person. I don't know. So many of these letters I found tell stories about like good people driven to desperation by their circumstances, who just unfortunately just absolutely had to go kill a guy for some insulin or whatever the case is. But it's just this relentless effort on the game's part, it felt to me, to justify that its own depiction of a post society, post collapse, world where it is that kill or be killed thing, and it felt almost kind of desperate to me at times in its effort to convince me that like this is like the way things would be, and I just don't buy it. I mean, and again, like I'm not saying that there aren't, we all know that like of course we are capable of violence. Violence would absolutely take place, but it's not the full story or the full spectrum of what people would be and who we are in those kinds of situations.
I think one of the other things around violence in the game that's happening is and yeah, you're right. Like everything, all of the little notes and all the little things are, even having the NPCs be like, "Oh no, she got Sam," and like screaming in horrific pain. Like there's a lot of attention to detail in this world in a lot of ways. But the one that I'm specifically referring to is like to make you feel bad, like to make you as the player feel bad for all of the murdering that you're doing. But one thing that I did notice is that because the game is so long, oh my God, it is unnecessarily long and it is unrelenting. And it's a lot, right? Like this game is a lot.
It's an ordeal. And so
to get to the end, it has to ramp up, right? Like it's ramping up in these ways that it starts to become even more exaggerated to me in ways that feel really silly. So for example, when Abby and Lev are fighting their way out of the Scar, like the island of the Scar Island or whatever. Abby is...
We call them Seraphites, Anita.
Seraphites,
come on, Scar is it's not an appropriate term.
How do you know I'm not a wolf, Caro?
Right.
But they... there's a character that you get stuck fighting, and he's a very large black man that wants to murder you uncontrollably for some fucking reason, and you're stuck in it because it's a video game, right? Like those are the moments that I'm like, oh, I'm in a video game still, and it's so exaggerated that I was like, oh, it has to be, because why is this any different than anything else that's been happening? And then you get to like the end,
right?
And So, okay, give you a little back. I'm going to backtrack slightly. The game ends, and then it ends again, and then it ends again, and then you play the game more, and then it ends. Like, I could not believe how many endings this game had. So there's a part where you see Ellie nesting, and like she's with Dina, and they have a baby, and all that kind of stuff. And then the game starts again, and you're playing as Lev and Abby in Santa Barbara looking for the fireflies, and they find them, and it's like this amazing moment because like Abby's finding her family, like that's what it really feels like, and that they're not alone, and that they have somewhere to go and people to connect with again. And then they are abducted by slavers, by like human trafficking slavers, and not only are they then abducted by like people who are happy to enslave other people in this moment, which I'm just like, at this point in the game, Carolyn, I'm just like, fuck everything. Like I really needed the space to reflect on this game after that, because I was so over it at this point. So this is now building to, not only are they like literally putting humans in cages and making them like do slave labor, that if you try to escape, you get mounted on a goddamn pillar to die. Like it is so extreme and so excessive to the point that I was like, come on already.
Yeah, and I guess part of my feeling about that, the way that the game is so relentless in its depiction of human beings just being vengeful murder machines, slavers, just being absolutely the absolute worst versions of humanity that one can imagine, is like, because I do feel like there's a way in which the narrative, it's trying to be critical. Like we can
for sure,
like
absolutely.
And so but then it's like so there's a way in which the narrative is saying like these people don't have to be making these choices, but they are making these choices. And then so then the question becomes for me, well then Naughty Dog, if you want to illuminate like other possibilities and like other choices, why did you feel that this was the game you had to make?
Well, and why is every single person in the world making horrific choices? Everyone?
Because it's sort of like the narrative wants to say, like, it doesn't have to be this way. But then you feel like, but then there's a way in which the game, being the kind of game it is, to me, says, well, it kind of does have to be this way, because if we made a game in which it wasn't this way, it wouldn't sell, or people, whatever, because this is all that we know, or this is all that people want. And, to me, there's a real tension between those two ideas.
Well, and then that leads me to what happens at that moment. So there are two moments in which, like, the game is really emotionally manipulative, and I don't say that like in a bad way necessarily, like that's a bad thing in general. I just find it troubling in how complicit the game makes the player in these choices, right? So there are two moments in which Abby and Ellie face off, and they're playable. Like you have to play them.
Yes.
And you can't continue the game or know what happens if you don't do it.
Right.
And it's extremely unsettling and difficult. And so the first one is Abby has to attack Ellie to, like, it honestly, Carolyn, it shocked me. Like, I was in the theater and being like, oh wait, what do I have to do now? Are you kidding me? Like, this isn't a cutscene. Like, you're making me do this. Right. And then and you're literally like attacking this character that you have known for years because you played Last of Us 1 and and the DLC and the beginning of the game, and all of a sudden you're attacking this person. Like, what the fuck? And then at the end of the game, or like, Ellie sees that Abby and Lev, like, you can see the physicality. Like, Abby has lost, like, all of her toning, all of her will, like, has lost everything, and all she wants to do is save Lev. They're like, I don't even know how they're standing at that point. And Ellie, and the game is trying to show us how much Ellie has become unhinged, that she's still like, you need to fight me in this moment. And you do. You have to do it. And I literally, Carolyn, I screamed at the TV. I was like, I was so mad. I was so mad in that moment. And that's when I was like, fuck this game. And I don't actually mean that, because I want to actually get into some of the stuff I really liked about it. But like that moment, I think is supposed to be, like, I think you're supposed to have a reaction like I'm having. I think you're supposed to be upset and frustrated by it. But I don't know if that, like, I don't see the value to that. And that's my problem, is that, like, I don't have a problem with eliciting emotion. I don't have a problem with, like, making characters bad. I don't have a problem with, like, complicated, confusing things.
Right.
But I have a problem with, like, making me do it. Right? I have a problem with, like, with I didn't want to do any of this. I didn't want to go on Ellie's revenge quest. I thought it was bad from the beginning. So what are you teaching me? Like, what are you trying to teach me here as the player?
I mean, and I definitely shared some of those feelings. I mean, there's a moment much earlier in the game when you confront or corner one of Abby's sort of colleagues, Nora, and Ellie is just desperate for information about Abby's whereabouts and is extremely furious, and she feels she has to resort to torture essentially to get the information out of Nora, and you see Ellie just like fuming, and then the square button prompt appears on screen, and it is essentially push square to do brutal torture. And that was definitely a moment where I felt like, no, game, fuck you, in a way. Like, I want to see this story through, but I am not, like, I like you, exactly. Like, I am against everything that Ellie has decided to do up to this point. I'm not, sort of complicit. I'm going to push square because I need to see where the story is going so that I can engage with it, and so that I can write something about it and talk about it on a podcast. But I sort of reject your efforts to indict me in this, when I would have preferred you make a game that didn't require this of me. Like this is not my choice. This is your choice. Yeah.
Absolutely. And the game also, like, you know, after that happens, Ellie's shaking. Like, she's like, oh my God, I just tortured someone. As if, like, which the irony of that is, like, you've literally murdered countless people. Like, is this,
it does that fairly common video game thing of, like, where, you know, in a way the game really wants you to feel each death, you know, each person you strangle out or whatever, however you murder everyone. Like, the game wants it to be this visceral experience, but it also is like dismisses those lives, and then you know, Ellie will kill one person in a cutscene, you know, Mel for instance, and suddenly be like shaken to the core about what she's done. But
right,
you know,
or like Dina. Like, Dina also went on this murdering rampage with her, and then there's a scene when Ellie, like, you're in a fight scene, and then it forces you to I forget which character it was. I think it was the it doesn't matter. Anyways, there's a scene where Dina says, "Holy shit, Ellie." Like, as if that's the thing. Like, that's the thing out of all of the things that have happened that you're like, wow, you're like crossing a line here. But yet you both just keep on keeping on, you know?
And so I will say that for my own, you know, part, and, you know, this is part of what I talk about in the piece, like, there was a sense in which the ending and Ellie's, you know, seeing Ellie pushed to that absolute extreme, like, I was completely not cool with it, and didn't see any value in it. And but then, you know, you do. So what happens is you get a flashback. Ellie returns to the home she shared with Dina. Dina's, you know, very wisely and understandably packed up because Ellie has demonstrated that the relationship is not a priority, that she cannot be a loving, committed partner, you know, that she's too kind of broken for that. But like, I felt like, to me, that final interaction with Joel on that last night before he was killed, it shed insight for me into just how massive the kind of shame that Ellie bears over being alive, you know, having survived when, you know, and being the one who potentially could have, you know, who knows, saved humanity, been the source of a cure, etc. Like, just how much shame and really, I think, self-hatred she carries about that. I mean, I've heard people say, you know, maybe she went to fight Abby, not to kill Abby, but to die. Like, maybe Ellie was kind of, you know, almost hoping that Abby would kill her. And I mean, I don't know, like, that didn't occur to me when I was playing the game, but I think it's an interesting possibility. And
yeah, like all of the destructive behaviors that someone might engage in because of trauma. Right. And this is an extreme version of that.
Exactly. And so to me, it's like, I saw in that final cutscene, and in the way that the remembrance of that is what makes Ellie kind of relent and let Abby and Lev go and be this kind of broken thing there on the edge of the world for a moment, you know, is like this like little bit of hope that maybe now Ellie can like start to do the work of like addressing the shame and the self-hatred and everything that she bears inside, and actually like want to live and be in the world as a person. And that's an interpretation and a feeling for me that requires me to see the game not in purely literal terms, right? Not as like, oh, Ellie literally murdered like 500 people and now she's going to start a redemption quest, but more as like a symbolic kind of psychological and emotional journey. But I did find that final scene between Joel and Ellie really good. So it worked for me on some level, even as I absolutely think that this game goes way overboard in its focus on savage violence, on brutality, on revenge, on people, on, you know, just this sort of hopeless, almost consistently hopeless view of humanity, you know, being rooted in these extremely destructive patterns.
Yeah. Well, and I think that gives us an opening to talk about some of the like the really tender moments in this game. You know, one of the things that I liked about the original Last of Us is how much breathing room there was. There's a lot of space, right? There's a lot of like walking and like just kind of being that I think is rare. I don't think this game had that. Instead, I don't think this game really had that, but instead I think what it did was, and I don't mean this as a making fun of, but like everyone loved the giraffe scene from Last of Us. And so I feel like they were like, cool, let's do like 25 giraffe scenes in this game.
Sure.
And and I think that feeds into what you were talking about earlier, Carol, in terms of how the acting and the art and the direction and the dialogue, like the relationship building and the character building in this game is exquisite.
Yes.
Right? Like that it is incomparable in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
And so there are all of these scenes that like are just really touching, and some of them are small and some of them are like tiny little, like walking into a house or something like that. But I'm thinking about the big tentpole pieces. So Ellie and Joel going through the museum.
that
scene was amazing.
The moment in the capsule where Joel has Ellie play the tape of like an actual mission control recording that he has somehow moved heaven and earth to get his hands on so that he could give Ellie that moment. I started crying. It's such a lovely moment to me because it's like it's a way Joel is sort of honoring Ellie's, the person that Ellie is and her dreams and like the dreams, of course, that she'll never get to pursue, but that it's I don't know. It's like celebrating them and grieving for them at the same time. I just that moment just absolutely. God, that moment worked so well for me.
It was amazing. And comparably, Owen and Abby then are in the aquarium.
Right.
And, like that was a really touching, like those are beautiful moments in these spaces and the excitement and like, there's just like Owen saying to Abby, like there's these moments where he's like, but don't we get to be happy too? Like don't we get to have these moments? And it's just,
Yeah, and exactly like this idea. I like Owen quite a bit. As a character, I like that the way that he comes to see that like he's not really. There are things more important and more interesting to him than being in the WLF, right? He's done. He wants out. He wants to just go, live some other life, and he sees that possibility. And like I wish the game had given more weight to that idea in some found ways to like to explore that more. But also like the scene with Ellie and Dina in like the grow house where they've like they've had sex or like it's not some it's not some sensationalized like hot like lesbian sex. It's you don't even see them have sex, but it's just like they're just both. It's just such a lovely like sort of understated like these understated moments that just view these characters as people. That's again I feel like this game, while I feel like it gets the big picture stuff about humanity so wrong sometimes, God, some of the smaller moments just ring so true, and it gets those so right.
Yeah, absolutely. The game has, sort of moving a little bit away from some of these topics. Like the game has like incredible. Sorry, I don't know what I'm doing. Okay. Accessibility. I just wanted to briefly mention accessibility.
Yes.
There are so many options for how to play the game. There are like difficulty levels, and you can micro and fine tune those difficulty levels in terms of like how much resources you want to be able to access at any given time, how much like how extreme the enemies are going to be, like what you can get away with. And I think that to me, I want to see way more games do that. And you can change it in the middle of the game. So if you're like hitting a spike, a difficulty spike that you can't get past, you can just drop the difficulty just to get through it if you're more concerned about the story or getting past or whatever. And like that I found really exciting when I started up the game.
Me too. It's and I've seen the activists who have been pushing for more accessibility options in games for a long time really praise this game for on that level. I mean, it's by sort of modern current standards, it's like, whoa, this game goes above and beyond. But really, probably this should be like the norm, right? Is like
totally.
games that offer so much to players as ways to play.
And we were talking about the attention to detail, and I feel some tension about this, because there are stories about how difficult or crunchy or toxic it is to work at Naughty Dog. And so like, there is, I think, a very important conversation happening around like, is it worth it? Right? Yeah. Like, is it worth it to have these this level of detail? And it's hard. Excuse me. It's hard because almost everyone I know who played the game immediately texted me being like, holy shit, I've never seen a game like this before. So like, there is a pride element too, but like, I don't think it can be at the cost of like human sanity. But I don't mean to undervalue the costs that it took from people in making the game. Also, the attention to detail in this world is incredible. Like, it's mind blowing. And so like, how do we hold both of those things, and how do we find better ways to like build incredible things that aren't at the cost of human sanity? But one of the examples that I point to, Carol, and I'm sure you notice this too, is at the crafting tables when you're upgrading your weapons. Every single weapon and every single upgrade and every single weapon has its own animation. So if you are adding a scope to a rifle, you will literally add the scope to the rifle. If you're adding an ammo cartridge, you're literally adding the ammo cartridge. I was like, that like there are like, how many different versions of that can there possibly be?
Exactly. And another thing that a lot of people have showered attention on are the rope animations in this game. So sometimes in this game you'll find a rope or a cable of some kind that you have to use to traverse a particular area, or use in a bit of like environmental puzzle solving or whatever. And the physics of not only the physics of the rope, but the way in which your player character, Ellie or Abby, like manages the rope and coils the rope and everything. Like it seems weird to cite something that seems so sort of minor as like genuinely impressive, but it is. Like when you're watching a game, or for me, I'm like, wow, I've never seen a physics object like that handled in quite so like realistic a way as that is here. Totally. Like it's they really did so much to try to make. It's weird. Like to me, there's a weird tension also between a game that wants so hard to make every little detail feel kind of grounded and believable on some level, but also let's also not forget that this is a video game. Like this is a game. This is a game in which you literally like take hundreds of pills that you just find lying around in places to access new skills on your skill tree, right? Like it has all those like just if you stop and think about them, like absolutely ludicrous, video gamey kind of character progression systems in the midst of this real. Yeah.
Like what a monumental tension that we're at in this regard, right? When we're talking about big AAA games. Like I remember saying about The Last of Us that it was the most emotional, like the most in-depth, real, sort of not realistic. I can't even remember how I phrased this, but like it
immersive was, maybe, or
like it was the most emotional game that I've ever experienced, and it hit the limits that you could do in a game where you're shooting people in the head for 25 hours, right? Like there's a certain level that you can't pass, even as with all of these like. I remember when I played the first Last of Us, it took me a second to realize that it was a woman in refrigerator trope, because I was so like, oh my God, what's happening? Like I was in it. I was in this story. I cared about these characters. Like it felt really real. And even as someone who like rails against this stuff, it took me a minute to be like, oh wait, that's a trope. like that wasn't okay, because it was done so quote unquote well, right? In all the things it means. And that kind of brings me to maybe a point that we can like a kind of nice point that we can wrap this part of the discussion on is I think that team really learned from their mistakes in the first game. And that I think is what I hope for in our industry. Like we can't change the past, but we can change what we're doing moving forward. And I know you can see the choices that they made in terms of like representation, in terms of like who dies and who doesn't die. Like for example, the like murder of like the only Black woman in the game was a huge problem. The womanist refrigerator trope, having it be a grizzled white dude as the star. I think that there's a lot of ways in which this game recognized and heard the criticism, not this game, the people who made it, people make these things, heard the criticisms and was like, okay, we're not going to do that again. Like, how do we move forward? And it doesn't mean that it was like perfect. And it doesn't mean, I got issues with some of the pregnancy stuff that happened in the game.
Sure.
But I love that. Like, I love that. Right. And kudos to that team for hearing those criticisms and understanding them and listening and acknowledging that.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't, I don't expect sort of perfection from art. I don't expect art that doesn't have anything that I might point out as flawed or that I might nitpick or criticize, right? But I do like to see what I consider to be, good faith efforts to, as you say, to kind of improve and to tell good stories that recognize the humanity in all of us. And again, I think there are ways in which the limitations of a violent, game sort of are inherently sort of dehumanizing or reductive about humanity. But at the same time, wow, kudos to them for populating it with this, wonderful assortment of characters, for humanizing them in so many great moments, and for really obviously trying to push forward some of our ideas of what a video game story can be and who it can be about.
Totally. Well, so folks, we are going to skip the freakouts for this week because I wanted to give us time to get into this because I feel like we could talk about this for 5 more hours. So we're going to take the rest of this conversation into the bonus, maybe talk a little bit about the reactions and some other things that we didn't get to. But before we end, Carolyn.
Yes.
In our script, you wrote the question, what did we think the game did? Ultimately, did we think the game was worthwhile or successful? How do you answer that?
It's complicated. I'll try to keep this short. I'm really glad it exists. I do think it was worthwhile in that it took risks that I appreciate it taking. I personally object to a lot of what it does, but man, it's a work that gives me as a critic and as a player a lot to think about and to engage with, and I'm always grateful for that. So ultimately, as unpleasant and arduous an experience as it often was, I would have to say that it was worthwhile for me. Yes.
Yeah, totally. I agree. We're going to link in the show notes an amazing piece that Carolyn wrote about the game that I think you all will get, you all will like a lot because it's really thoughtful. It talks about a bit of what we talked about here and goes into some more, some other aspects of it. But yeah, I agree. I think it's exciting to have something so meaty to dive into, and I think that the tension of this game, the position of it, the reactions to it, it's not like I'm great, let's debate the value of human life or anything like that. But I do think that we don't get a lot of games that are, that give us so much. Right. That give us so much in terms of where do we want to go and what pieces are regressive and how does this change the face of AAA games? And I value those moments. I value those tentpole games. And I also, I got to say that I think that there's still a lot of nods to trying to have better integration of representation in games. And I feel like it's really exciting to me that this game did what it did.
I mean, one thing I do say in my piece is I think, 10 years ago, I don't think I could have even imagined a massive, again, blockbuster, a game aimed at a game this expensive aimed at the widest possible audience with characters like these. And it's thrilling to see that happening. It's really cool.
Yeah. All right, y'all. Well, thank you so much for listening to Feminist Frequency Radio. Stay tuned for the Freakin' After Party, which is only available to backers of this podcast. And you can hear more of our conversation on The Last of Us 2. And you can do that at patreon.com/femfreak. And of course, you can find us on all the podcatchers. And if you haven't yet, please go to iTunes and subscribe, rate, and review us. Unless you're here to just shit on us, in which case, fuck off. Because I feel like we might get some of those on this particular episode. This show is engineered by Rob Pera. Carrie Stimson provides technical support. Artwork is by Jamie Varon, and our intro music is by Full Circus. Join us next week for another feminist dive into pop culture. Thanks for listening, y'all.
Later.